the system itself is dying. So they've done what they can to position themselves for the recession, but when the actual system comes under pressure, any scheme that they have, whether it be FDIC insurance on bank accounts or ways to ease the economy of print money, is not going to work because the system's going to come down. That's been history.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Weekly Special for June 20th through June 27th, 2023, while supplies last. This week we featured 2023 1-ounce silver maple coins at $4.99 over spot and backdated 1-ounce silver Australian kangaroos at just $3.99 over spot. Silver maples were the first silver sovereign coins to be minted at 4 nines fine purity, and the 2023 silver maples remain one of the most in-demand coins today. They come 25 to a tube, 500 to a box, and are available at $4.99 over spot with a minimum order size of 1 tube. Next, backdated kangaroos are 4 nines fine 1-ounce silver sovereign coins of Australia, renowned for their purity and design. They come 25 to a tube, and with just 250 coins to a monster box, they are the most affordable monster box available, especially at just $3.99 over spot per ounce while supplies last. Our specials this week are IRA eligible, and if you'd like to learn more about a precious metals IRA, call us and we'll be happy to help you in that process. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Robert Kientz from Gold Silver Pros. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Elijah. I appreciate it.
Well, it's great to have you as always. Our viewers always enjoy having you on. I did want to discuss the Fed pause we saw last week. You've mentioned on your channel that really it looks like there are going to be a few more rate hikes, but the Fed is really only doing this so that they can cut when the recession hits. Your perspective?
If you look at IMF research, it does take about 5 to 6 full percentage points, throughout history, through the central banking era. When you hit a recession, central bankers like to have 5 to 6 percentage points so they can cut. So they'll ease. And a couple of ways of easing: you can make credit easier to obtain by lowering interest rates. You can also, print money, lots of those types of things. So having those interest rates for when the recession comes, it's basically, to me, an admission the recession's coming, because when you have those interest rates above 5 and they're pausing right now, that tells you that they think that they've reached where they need to go. And they left open the option of a couple more, maybe quarter point rate hikes, perhaps. Maybe we get closer to 6, but they're staying in that band that the IMF has said that's where you need to be. So that's an indication, it's a confirmation, without them saying it, that they expect a recession is coming or it's already here. But they're using traditional policy tools, which I don't think are going to be as effective. Because if you look at the amount of debt that we have, it's more than we've ever had. And we already know, Kenneth Rogoff and Carmen Reinhart's research was that once you get past 90% debt to GDP, you're past point of no return. You're going to have either a debt jubilee or a big blow off in debt or some sort of maybe hyperinflationary episode. There are different routes to go in history. But typically what has happened is the central banks will try to ease their way out or print their way out of the debt-based issue, the debt-based deflationary shock to the economy. And I think that the Fed expects a normal cyclical shock is coming to the economy, but given the fundamentals, I don't think it's normal at all. I think it's, you could look at the 80-year quantitative cycle, you could look at the 250-year nation state cycle and see that what we have now is much different. This is not 2000, 2008, 1980. These are much different circumstances. So while the U.S. has positioned the central bank has positioned itself with that IMF policy guidance based upon the research of past recessions, this isn't going to be any regular recession. It's not a business cycle recession. It is a debt collapse, a collapsing debt under a deflationary economy that can't support it. And not everyone, but a lot of the world is getting out of dollars. They're de-dollarizing, building alternative trade networks, building gold-backed currencies, so building their own militaries, building their own trade route, things like that. So this is a completely different situation than like a mid-cycle ordinary recession, a pullback. where you have to have 20-30% correction. The markets need to reset. We're not in one of those. We're in the end of the current system. So 5 to 6 percentage points on a dying system is not going to do anything. The system itself is dying. So they've done what they can to position themselves for the recession. But when the actual system comes under pressure, any scheme that they have, whether it be FDIC insurance on bank accounts or ways to ease the economy of print money, is not going to work because the system's going to come down. That's been history. And so what the Fed is trying to do is address a normal business cycle, but we're not in the normal business cycle. That's the difference. And so I don't think overall it's going to be terribly effective.
That is interesting because we have seen over the last few years the Fed being wrong time and time again. For example, one, just the inflation being transitory. Obviously it wasn't, and they had to raise rates significantly to even have it go down at all. And we're still seeing high inflation as we speak. I guess it's no surprise that it sounds like the Fed is going to be wrong again if they're really just expecting a mild recession.
The Fed, they employ a lot of smart people, but they're not classically trained economists, most of them. They're trained in Keynesian economics, which has never worked in the history of the world. Keynesian economics, socialism, that political system and the monetary system that fit together, they don't work. They've never worked. But we're not in a capitalistic society in the U.S. anymore. We're very much a mixed, I would say a lot of socialism. I would even say a lot of closed or over-regulated markets that aren't truly free. So none of the capitalistic tools that you would normally have at your disposal are going to work in this environment. And the Fed governors have all been brought up under a system, with the exception of Powell, have been brought up under a system that teaches them that they're supposed to run everything. They're supposed to control the levers of finance. And if they don't, they're going to suffer catastrophe. The reality is that centralization of the monetary and political systems, and they go hand in hand. Politics and money go hand in hand because politics is how you distribute that money. So they're always entwined. And we've had a centralization of both of those. And that's not capitalism. So a lot of what worked in the past isn't going to work now. And the Fed can't stop what's going to come. They just can't. And it's really, I want to impress this upon your listeners. Don't buy any of the BS coming out of the mainstream financial media or the banks or the government, because they're never going to tell you the full truth. They never do. They never will. They'll tell you what they need to tell you to try to manage the market. They're managing the Titanic hitting the iceberg and potentially going down and not having enough lifeboats. So you have to protect yourself, period. If you're not protecting yourself in this time, you could be in serious trouble. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Make preparations for what is coming, because this system cannot be sustained. It will not be sustained. And people will need to make their own choices about how you deal with that. And staying in the 401k and the banking system and leaving it all in there is not the way to go. And if this were, Elisha, if this were a normal business cycle correction, I wouldn't be so adamant about what I'm saying when I come on your show. I wouldn't be so adamant about weathering the storm and kind of just going to safety and kind of staying out of the main markets. This time is different. And when I wrote for Seeking Alpha for 12 years, I covered several normal business cycle recessions. This is not the same thing. So whatever the authorities are saying that they're doing to protect you, it will not be enough, because that system itself is collapsing. You can't use a tool within the system to fix the system. You have to bring in something else. You have to go outside the system.
Now, another aspect playing into all of this is that the dollar is being abandoned slowly throughout the world. You recently reported that, I believe was it 9 Asian nations are abandoning the SWIFT system. And you've mentioned how, it's not something that happens overnight, that the dollar is rejected. It's still the biggest reserve. It's the most used reserve currency in the world. And there needs to be this replacing of infrastructure. This whole system needs to be replaced. What are some of the signs that you're seeing and new developments that you're seeing that the infrastructure is being replaced so that other countries can trade without using the dollar?
Real quick, the easiest way is just look at a statistic. The amount of dollars used in foreign transactions to facilitate, say, petrodollar trade for oil or trade around the world when other countries need to buy stuff in dollars, they have to hold them. And so when you look at foreign dollar reserves and euro dollar or similar type of accounts, that's a good indication of how much trade is using the dollar. Well, in the last 10 to 15 years, we've gone from 70% share of the dollar in foreign reserves to 60, and some of the other currencies are starting to move up. So we're moving more into a multipolar world in currency. Now, the U.S. still has a ton of trade contracts denominated in U.S. currency, but these are time dated. As some of these contracts and agreements run out, countries are electing not to renew in U.S. dollar base. And in some cases where sanctions were placed, like on Russia or on China during the Trump administration, they just decided, screw our existing agreements. We're just going to build it anyway, because they knew that the U.S. was not being fair. The U.S. is protecting U.S. trade. The rest of the world's got to protect themselves. It's very predictable if they're coming out. So China and Russia have come out with their own wire systems that are similar to SWIFT. And really, SWIFT is a messaging system, not the transfer system, but it gives the instructions. It's basically the control for the money flows. And if you're in a participating bank with SWIFT, you're in the money flow. That's good for business. If you're not, it's not good. So when the sanctions occurred against China and Russia in particular, but other nations as well, from the U.S. and U.S. friends, they needed alternative system. The U.S. basically pushed them out of the dollar trade, which was stupid. And then Saudi Arabia came in and said, you're pressuring us politically, so we're going to go do deal with Iran for oil with our currency. And that was brokered by China. And who thought that Saudi Arabia and Iran would get together? And who thought that 9 Asian countries that are part of a currency union, the ACU, decided we're so sick of what's going on. And this is a second order effect, Elijah. The sanctions weren't put directly on these countries, but these countries trade with the ones the sanctions were put on. So not only did it force Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, and China out of the U.S. dollar system stupidly, when the U.S. had a near monopoly on international trade. How stupid was that? The political, the currency ramifications, the economic ramifications of the political choices is coming home to roost. And all these countries that do business, that have, they're on the Belt and Road Initiative, or they've got existing trade with Russia, China, or the Middle East, or Brazil, or these BRICS nations, India, they're going to trade in they're going to have to get around the sanctions. So it forced them to create alternative systems. And right now, those 9 Asian countries are going to use CPAM, which is Iran's system. All of a sudden, I mean, who would have thought 5 years ago, Elijah, if I came and told you 9 Asian countries are going to go to Iran's wire system outside, and not use the U.S. system, which has been in place for how many decades? Yeah, I mean, you would have thought I was nut. Iran? Are they the bastion of freedom? Are they the bastion of financial market? Where did they come from? Well, once upon a time, they were. And what we see is a movement back to traditional financial centers that are not part of the West and haven't been part of the trade for a very long time. And when the world goes in a crisis, the world goes to what it knows. And what the world knows are some of these older ancient cultures that have been around for a long time. They're starting to awaken. They're tired of the West crap. Okay, excuse me, but they are. And they're establishing their own trade. So right now, the Asian currency unions using Iran's CPAM system, they're developing their own. Why didn't they wait to develop their own? They literally said in the announcement, we cannot trade in this current system. We're forced to use Iran. So the U.S. just pushed billions of dollars trade, potentially trillions, into the arms of one of our enemies in Iran, our stated enemies, and we're building up their financial system, because as that money flows, what do? You've got money to invest. You just gave power to your enemies, quote unquote, if that's the way that you see them politically and geopolitically. It's the most insane thing I've ever seen. But the U.S. is pushing countries away and into the hands of these alternative systems. And it's a hodgepodge. I mean, China's got theirs, but it doesn't do everything. Russia's got theirs, it doesn't do everything. Iran's got theirs, it doesn't do everything. And that comment earlier you made about it takes time. It does. It takes time. First, it takes about a generation, about 20 years for people to accept changes. It takes a new generation. So what they're doing is they're putting this in place. They're getting the new generations used to new systems. They're talking about it, but it's going to take time for that to go into place. No one system is capable of replacing what the Western financial system has built, but do not underestimate these countries. These countries, many of them have been around for thousands of years. They've got no problem establishing trade networks and currencies. They've done it long before the U.S. was ever a gleam in the eye of Columbus or the founding fathers or anyone else. Back when we just had Native Americans, all these other countries had complex financial systems. And I think that the Western world has this hubris where we think that we kind of rule over everything, and we don't. And that hubris is coming home to roost. The rest of the world is de-dollarizing. They're making alternative trade agreements, alternative payment systems. And the thing that's going to accelerate that is the blockchain. The blockchain and central bank digital currencies is going to facilitate this much faster. It's not going to take 100 years to build the new system. It may take 5 to 10. And by the time that they get it built, you're going to have an entire generation of people that are used to these new systems and are used to going away from the dollar. The dollar is the old system. And once that takes place, Elijah, and you get these millennials and the Gen Zers looking at the new systems and the new technology, you're never going back. You'll never get it out, ever. So I think what we're going through is not only the end of U.S. dominance in the currency markets and even in politics, but you're looking at a shift into more technology, more centralized control, and more of a multipolar world where you have different countries participating, no one country dominating. How long that lasts, I don't know. But I think we'll have that intermediate period where that happens and all these systems are developed. And then we'll have a switch over maybe 10, 15 years from now where the U.S. is no longer even a major part of international trade. And the U.S. is having to buy Chinese yuan or whatever other currency the world settles on. And I think that's eventually going to occur. And if you look at currency transitions, that's what typically happens. In this case, it's more technology driven than anything, but that technology is just going to accelerate the process. And I think that's what we're looking at now. We're still kind of in the early phases, but a lot of the technology being put into place now had been developed for the last 10 to 15 years. So we're actually a little bit farther along than people think. I think now it's more of a cultural phenomenon where you have to get people used to basically what's going on.
And it seems like things are accelerating, especially as we see the BRICS nations developing a new reserve currency. They're having a summit, I believe, in August, where they're probably going to be discussing this, possibly having it commodity or gold backed. And also, the story is that there's 25, I believe, countries looking to join the BRICS. So you had this organization that was there was 5 nations, and now it potentially could be 30 nations. President Macron wants to be at the meeting from France. So it seems like this movement away from the dollar really is accelerating.
Yeah, a lot of the U.S. dollar hegemony, which just means dominance, I guess, fancy word, basically saying we dominated everything because we had the currency. When you have the currency, you can dominate politics and trade. Well, with the way the U.S. has treated their currency and forced everybody out of it because the debt is horrible right now. Who wants to hold a U.S. Treasury? Nobody. Look at interest rates. They're booming. Nobody wants it. You think interest rates would be good, and typically it is. But if you're holding a bond and interest rates goes up, you just lost money because you're not competitive with the new bond that has a higher coupon than you do. And the collapse of treasuries has led people to get out of the dollar. And the U.S. dollar, the U.S. trying to assert its political will on the rest of the world has caused people to say, forget you. We're going to do the unthinkable and drop out of your system. There's no other way to put it. The U.S. has alienated itself. I'm talking the political class, not us, the average everyday people. We're just going, to work our jobs and our families. And we don't know all this stuff's going on. We're just trying to live. And in that BRICS summit that's coming in August, if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, you have the BRICS and you have the Belt and Road. The BRICS is Brazil, China, Russia, India, South Africa. But the Belt and Road Initiative is 72% of the world economies. And of course, when you make it appealing and you've got 72% of the world's economies able to trade with each other, what's going to happen in the currency? You're going to develop a currency block. The trade comes first, the currency comes after, right? So that's what's being built. The alternative currency systems in the world are being built right in front of our eyes. That's what it is. And yes, you're going to hold conferences just like we have G7 and G20 and Davos and all of those, that we have. The rest of the world's going to do the same thing. But the rest of the world they're bigger than we are. We were the big bully on the block. This is everybody else throwing the bully off the block and saying goodbye, see ya. You're by yourself, bully, go watch your movie on Friday night. We're not hanging out with you anymore. That's what's going on. And this BRICS summit, they're talking about alternative currencies. Well, they've already announced, China, Russia have already announced a gold-backed currency. We've had the announcement of maybe like an Asian currency, regional currencies, because it's all based on digital currency. It's the blockchain, a centralized version of it that all the central banks are toying with. And they have the technology and the tools right now to roll out whatever they want. And all you have to do is build support for that. How do you build support? Well, you got to build demand. How do you build demand? You get into a trade union, okay? And that builds demand for trade. And then you simply slide the currency on top of that. But it has to be a recognizable currency. And it takes time. It takes time for all these nations to decide they want to join, to vote. And the dominant nations, are going to be big ones. It's going to be the BRICS. It's going to be the big sizable ones are going to dominate, much like the G20 or NATO or anything like that, or even the IMF. And the funny thing is, these international agencies that originally were built for the Western system, the BIS and the IMF, are pivoting. And not only are they pivoting, like you said, France is pivoting, Germany's pivoting, Saudi Arabia, one of our biggest allies is in the Middle East, is now pivoting. I think Dubai's tired of the U.S. and London, particularly because of the gold trade. They're pivoting. Africa, China, and Russia have more business going on in Africa than people even realize. And they're protecting it with joint civilian military bases. They're not building a big military complex, but they're protecting their interests so that they can protect trade. And all of that is eroding not only the existing foundations of the Western system, but it's taking away the alternatives that we may have to go establish new trade. And by the way, most of the world's resources, gold, silver, rare earths, and otherwise, are sitting in the Middle East and Africa. Well, they're not joining the Western trade groups. They're going east. So who's going to have all the power and the control in the world the next 50 to 100 years? It sure as heck is not going to be the U.S., Canada. Even Mexico to our southern border is joining the BRICS. Think of previously we had the Monroe Doctrine, and we always protected the North American continent, but the North American continent is being split apart from a trade perspective and from a political perspective. A lot of the things that we took for granted are no longer going to be here. And those are the changes that people are going to have to get used to. And of course, the effect of all that, to wrap that up, is everything's going to get more expensive. Right now, and people, the one thing that people tell me, especially in the military, I have a lot of friends in the military, especially in the Navy, they're like, our cold water Navy, nobody's ever going to challenge us. Well, yeah, but that cold water Navy doesn't run without rare earths. And guess who either manufactures or processes 90% of rare earths in the world? That would be China. So China can squeeze, and this has come out in the news recently, China can squeeze a rare earth market and the U.S. military grinds to a halt. So the U.S. military, without a working currency and without supplies to make it work, is basically ineffective. And this may be the analogy to what happened to Rome, where they couldn't pay their soldiers and they couldn't clothe them and feed them. We're not going to be able to pay our soldiers, clothe or feed them, or give them, the equipment that they need if we end up just pissing off the rest of the world, because we truly live in a global environment, but we're not acting as if we are. The rest of the world is acting as if they are, and we're no longer a part of it. And I just wonder how long it is before the American people go to our government and say, we've had enough. You're making all the wrong enemies and all the wrong friends. And what's going to happen politically, it'll break down the U.S. when people can't feed themselves. The average food item that you buy in your grocery store travels 1,000 miles. And a lot of food comes from Brazil. It doesn't just come from the southern U.S. It comes from Mexico. These are all people moving over to these other. So you could have food shortages because they're shipping their food somewhere else. We have to be super careful with how all this stuff goes on. And people out there need to understand what's going on so they can start talking to the representatives saying, hey, wait a minute, we know that the end of the dollar is coming because it always happens to fiat currencies. We know we're going to go through a big crash. We know all that. Let's not make it harder on ourselves by just alienating everybody around the world that could possibly help us.
That's a very good point, that this might be kind of an inevitable transition that's happening, but it would probably be better to not make it worse at the same time. I did want to ask you before we let you go, kind of the ways that people can, in light of what's happening right now, and it might not be good for the U.S., it's still, we have to play the cards that we're dealt. You mentioned recently on one of your videos that people are moving to precious metals, and this would be a good investment during this period in your view. Even young people are moving to gold. Can you expand on this movement that we're seeing in the new technologies, also with respect to investing in gold that are out there that are really pushing this transition?
Yeah, so a lot of young people are starting to get into gold, and you can tell because they're starting to talk about it. And I'm a member of a lot of different online groups, but also one here in Dallas-Fort Worth that is a group of 20s and 30s, millennials that talk about the world. It's a thinking group of people that are concerned about the world, and they talk about everything from politics to money. And they've started to wake up and talk about the problems going on in the world. And not only are they just interested in Bitcoin, but they're also interested in gold and silver as well. And I have someone who, when I was at Silver Symposium a year and a half ago, I did a presentation on gold and silver, and there was a young person in the crowd that was into Bitcoin. And he said, I'm into Bitcoin, the cryptos, why gold or silver? And I explained why gold or silver could be part of a portfolio right alongside other things and why it would be important. And he literally got up from that meeting afterwards and went and bought silver from the one booth that was selling it there. And I just did an interview with him. He's now doing interviews for Stock Pulse, another provider that I do interviews for. And he interviewed me. And he was like, you got me into silver. And I said, well, good. And I said, we can talk silver and Bitcoin. Let's talk about multiple investments. And so the young crowd is starting to see it. And, my kids understand the value of gold and silver. Whenever I pay them for something, they want gold and silver. They don't want cash. They get it. And kids are starting to get in. And I'm starting to see the awareness, which is a good thing. When you combine those two together, when you put blockchain on top of gold and silver, you can have like an asset-backed digital currency, or some people call them stable coins. Not all stable coins are made the same, but there are technologies out there where you can invest in gold and silver, have access and title to it, but not have to store it at home. That's something that people could consider that kind of blends together, technology and gold and silver. Plus, it's also easier now to own gold and silver, have it stored someplace safe. Now, you have to be super careful when you do that. A lot of people say if you don't hold it, you don't own it. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I get the sentiment. Just look, if you're going to look into those storage, or you're going to look into like digital gold, look at it, make sure that you're with reputable providers and stuff like that. And I won't recommend any on your program, but those are ways to get into it. And it combines the love of technology with the love of the metals. And a lot of young people are getting into that. But I see a lot of renewed interest in gold, and I see it in Bitcoin too. Bitcoin's gone up. It was at 26, now it's at 31, I think, on Friday. So people are getting back into these alternative currencies and these alternative ways of investing right now. But they're getting into gold and silver. You can see it. And, a lot of the sales, we have providers that we sell for in our program, as well as, you guys have one as well. And what I'm seeing when the sales come through, there are younger kids that are getting involved that are 17, 18, 19, 20, wanting to get involved in the precious metals. So we definitely see a renewed interest in the precious metals, because I think that when you go through a crisis, every generation, as they go through a crisis, is going to find alternative investments, and they're going to find gold and silver. So for everybody out there that thinks that the millennials and Gen Zers will never invest in the metals, I think the evidence shows that we're wrong, and it's an unfounded worry, because as every generation goes through their big financial crisis, they discover it. I discovered it 13 years ago. I was in my 30s. I was the equivalent of what a millennial is today. And I had a family, and I thought, what's the best way to protect them? So more people are starting to come in and build awareness. And when you combine that with technology, it's opened up the doors for people to get involved who may have otherwise been shy to do so. So I definitely think that we're seeing renewed investment into gold and silver from the younger crowd and the younger audiences. And I think we'll continue to see that as we get further into the financial crisis.
I think one of the things you mentioned is that, a lot of younger people are getting into this, and that's definitely true. And it seems like in the face of crises, that's often what happens, is that, you kind of, in some sense, and I see this as a good thing, that you revert to tradition, you revert to what has worked so many times back in the past, and you revert to what is solid, literally, gold and silver. So if you can share with our viewers any last thoughts you had and where our viewers can find you online.
Yeah, so simply they can find us at goldsilverpros.com and on social media at goldsilverpros, and watch out for the impersonators. I think we have 15 Twitter impersonators right now, but we got the blue check mark if you find us. Website goldsilverpros.com. And I would say, just education is the number one thing, because it's great to take action. We all have the A type, the A side of our personalities that says, go do something. I'm worried about this, go do something. And that's great. But combine that with a study. Listen to your show, Elijah, and all the guests that you have on your program. You have a wonderful, what I would call a variety show of everything everybody needs to prepare. You don't got to go anywhere else. So just come here and listen. But educate, and make decisions that are best for you and your family. And don't be afraid to pull the trigger on something just because your brother or the CNBC analyst or your well-meaning best friend tells you you're a nut. You've got to make the choices that are right for you, but research. Get your knowledge first. Don't fall for scams. Use reputable companies and make sure that you're doing what's best for you. Do your research and do what's best for you. And if you do that, you're going to come out okay, I believe.
Fantastic. Once again, Rob, thank you so much for your time. We'll put links in the description of this video to your work. And once again, thank you so much for your time, and God bless.
Thank you.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we can let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Kaiser, my brother Elijah, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.